Got it.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Underground Bunker Podcast. This is your proprietor, Tony Ortega. And I'm so happy that today I am with Sands Hall. Sands, it's been a little while since we've seen each other, isn't it? Hasn't it been?
Has indeed, Tony. It has indeed. I think it was in New York City at my book launch or something. Yeah, at Amy Tan's house. Yeah.
Very nice. Shindig, and you performed music that night.
I did. I did. Yes. One of my favorite things to do.
Well, for those Underground Bunker readers that maybe weren't around then, Sands Hall is a well-known writer and educator and musician who came out with a wonderful book about Scientology 5 years ago. And right. And just deliciously written, very rich, captured the internal journey that someone goes through with Scientology. Maybe, I think you and Kate Bornstein maybe captured that mental journey better than anybody. And then I got to meet you at this party, and I was surprised that there you were playing music. But you come from a really interesting family, and why don't you fill in folks a little bit that maybe aren't that familiar, weren't around in 2018 when we were writing about all this?
Well, let's see. I managed to extricate myself from Scientology in the early 90s, and it took a long time actually to wrench all that away. But I didn't really start working on a memoir for a long time because I just kept thinking that all I had done was make an enormous mistake. I didn't think there was anything I had to say about it. And in fact, probably the biggest issue is that I spent a decade of my life pretending a decade of my life hadn't happened, which is not a very productive way to live. And yes, I do come from a really interesting family, and that's a big part of the memoir because I think it's really important, and I imagine Underground Bunker folk will agree that it's so many of us come to Scientology, if those of the bunker people that have been in there, there's never ends, I know, but we come with our own baggage, and I really thought it was very, very important to lay out what the wonderful and delightful and fabulous, though my family was and is, I felt it was very important to lay out the kind of culty, difficult things that I was actually both entrenched in and trying to escape, and that Scientology, for which reason Scientology seemed very attractive. So I happened actually to be teaching very fortunately at a wonderful college, Franklin and Marshall College back east. And amongst the classes I had to teach got lucky enough to teach was a course called Introduction to Myth and Fairy Tale. And it was in the process of, one of the reasons I very much wanted to teach that class was that I had stumbled, of course, as many of us have over the years, on Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. And I know Joseph Campbell's fallen into repute, and he's a sexist, and he's a Western person, and but there's a lot of fabulous things in his writings, of course. In fact, sometimes I think someone should do a parallel PhD comparing Campbell and Hubbard. It actually would be very, very intriguing because there are some similarities, including how they speak on their tapes, which is interesting. Anyway, one of the reasons I wanted to teach that myth and fairy tale course, Tony, was because I wanted to have the kids go, the hero's journey will be a way to solve when you're in the darkness forevermore in your life. If you can just remember that when you are in the underworld, there's a world to come back to. And this voice kept whispering, saying, maybe your trip through Scientology was like that. And it was like, no, it was just a mistake. It was a great big effing mistake. And I wish I hadn't done it. But this voice just kept whispering. And finally I turned and paid attention to that. And that was when I began to really work on my memoir.
And you already had come from a literary family. Can you tell us a little bit about that for the people that aren't familiar with that?
Yes. Well, my father, Oakley Hall, who died in 2008, was a pretty well-known writer amongst writers. I just finished a wonderful mystery by a guy named John Harvey, and to my surprise and delight, he actually references one of my dad's books in that book. So he was kind of in that world of the literary. People really admired him, and he was a beloved teacher. And So he was big shoes around, and I did never think of myself as a writer. I actually pursued theater. My brother was also a writer and a playwright, and started a theater back in New York, upstate New York, called the Lexington Conservatory Theater, which was a fabulous thing that we all just theater in a barn. So I just had these big sort of male figures around me who were writers, and I just didn't think of myself that way. And then little by little, I turned my direction that way. But it was great to have those legacies, in fact, to live up to and to try to, fit within and just find my own way.
Well, and I think people are always interested to learn, how does somebody who grew up in an environment like that, is obviously a very literate person, a very intelligent person, how do you fall? Oh, sorry about, forgot to set this up. How do you fall into something like Scientology?
Right. There are so many interesting little things. I've thought about this, of course, over the years. One is that my mother was raised Christian Science. And although none of that pervaded our lives, because my parents were probably, if they were anything, they were agnostic. Although I think my dad kind of retained his early Episcopalian stuff. He had great affection for great pieces of music like the Hallelujah Chorus, and that kind of stuff was often in the house. And they admired artwork that had to do with the Madonna or the Buddha. My mother collected all these East stuff, and there were crucifixes in and so there was a lot of mishmash of religious stuff in our house. But that Christian Science was interesting, because I remember specifically, I talk about this in my memoir, when I didn't want to go to school one day, and Mom said, "What happened on the playground yesterday?" I mean, she just went to it. And it was very true that I was feeling sick, but it was because of something that had happened. And she got right down to the basis of it and said, come out and eat your egg and go to school. And so that was interesting. The other thing that's fascinating was that my parents just derided psychiatry. They thought it was very much of their era, the tool of the devil. So in a way, kind of as I crept towards Scientology, and I'll tell you how I came there, but it was like I might get their approval,
Right,
because
right,
Scientology didn't like psychiatry either.
right.
And so there were these really bizarre reasons that, but bottom line, my beloved brother had fallen off of a bridge in the theater company in upstate New York, had basically lobotomized himself, was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. It was a really big trauma. I mean, it took me a long time to understand what a huge trauma it was, in fact. And so I was in New York at that time, Tony, and within 18 months of that accident, I was walking into Milton Katselas's class
Oh,
in
that's
Los
right.
Angeles, and then there were all these cool stars that were on the edges of Scientology and in Scientology. And then I started to work at $2 bills opposite Celebrity Center. And there was that crenellated, it's so classy now, but then it was kind of in complete disrepair, actually. But it was obviously very handsome building even then, and very intriguing. And then in came Mike Garson trio, and Shelby Flint was singing, and Jamie Font was on the upright bass.
Mm,
And that was my first experience with jazz, really. I'd been a folk singer. You can tell by looking at me the kind of music I had tended to play. It's jazzier now, but I fell in love with jazz, and I kind of fell in love with Jamie.
yeah,
And he's the one that hauled me along into the actual church itself.
right. And you do such a good job describing the technology, the courses, what it kind of does to you. It's been some time now since the book came out and we've been talking. I'm always curious, do you still find yourself dealing with those thoughts and ways of patterns of thinking that Scientology kind of instilled in you many years ago?
Really interesting, excellent question. One of the things I wanted to do was to draw the reader into being interested in Scientology the way that I had gotten interested in Scientology.
Right.
There were a lot of different people I wanted to reach, and amongst the many precious letters that I've received over time have been those saying, now I understand why my sister, now I understand why my cousin.
Right.
Thank you very much. And I loved that my editor, when she was assigned the book at Counterpoint, said that to her husband. She told me this, that she didn't want to keep reading the book because Sands made Scientology sound way intriguing, and it was really worrisome to her. So those were all real compliments. And the other thing I think that's interesting about that question is that when I first sent the book off, long story, but to very briefly say, it had a different title. It was first it was called Pilgrimage, and then eventually I got the flunk start, and it was called Report from a Former Scientologist. This is actually the first cover. This is so funny, actually. This was the very first cover.
Okay, Report from a former
Yes,
Scientologist. Okay.
scratched out flunk starts like that. So, so then as we were maneuvering our way through various covers and thoughts, my wonderful editor Jennifer Alton said, "You know, Sands, I think it should be called Reclaiming My Decade Lost in Scientology." And at first I was really resistant. I didn't like that idea of having, although the lost decade was totally a word I used, reclaiming seemed odd. But in fact, it was the most perfect word, because it allowed me to actually turn my gaze at that 7 years of involvement and 3 years of pulling myself away, and to say, well, what was in that decade? What was in those years? And those are the things I try to lay out in the book, particularly for me. Word clearing. I loved the bloody dictionary. I went down word chains that were as long as Monopoly games. I mean, I loved word clearing, and the whole idea of derivations and where words came from. That to this day, that is just a fascination of mine. I mean, the other day we were talking about oncology, and this friend of mine and I was like, what is onco? Oh, it's tumor. It's like, those are really, it's just great to have that grounding. I think the thing that has taken me a long time, and I still stumble on it, but it's partly because it was of that early Christian Science as well,
Right.
from Mom, is that if the car gets scraped, I use the inactive form of that. If I scrape the car, if the car gets scraped, this happened to me, actually. Someone keyed my car when I was in a rehearsal. Just, I don't know why, but that's an example. Stub my toe, break the glass, something happens, immediately there is that, what did I do to pull it in? What did I do to pull it in? And I think there's those of us in Scientology who I think go straight to the guilt. I think some people don't have that problem. It may be more familiar to women than to men to some degree, but there's that sense of, what did I do? And that's probably been the hardest thing to pry out of my soul and just say, as a friend of mine sent me a picture with a picture of her little kid with a bib covered with carrots, mashed carrots, and it said, spit happens. Sometimes spit happens. And that was, that's to this day, I think, the most perhaps psychologically damaging thing. The other thing, even as I was researching the book, and as you know, Tony, I researched because I made sure that every single piece of tech I quoted, every single thing I said about Hubbard had a footnote at the end of the book. Because I love footnotes. I think they're great, but I also wanted to cover my ass. I just wanted to cover my ass. So that was what was really interesting, was to see how Miscavige has changed the names of courses and changed the names of drills and changed the first thing we all study is keeping Scientology working. It's like nowhere in sight anymore. I just can't even believe the changes. And that was so fascinating to me, to watch how the tech has been so altered.
I was just explaining to a reporter today at a very major publication, by the way, that
Right.
they wanted to understand why people have left. And I explained that there's various reasons, but that one of the thing is that some of the reasons are hard to explain to people outside of Scientology because they're so arcane. So I found myself trying to explain to this reporter how Miscavige changed the definition of a floating needle,
Yeah.
and that this drove away thousands of people. They
Yeah.
couldn't believe that he was altering the tech, and said, now can you imagine that that's the thing that has you leave this thing you've been. But so it's just some of the stuff is so arcane, and it's really hard to understand. But that's what I liked about your book, is you really made us feel like we're experiencing it. You do express the appeal really well, and but then also I liked, well, when you brought up keeping Scientology working, for example, you talked about how the first 4 or 5 rules are just sort of like, yeah, we're all together in this, we're going to do the right thing. But then after that, it gets kind of scary and dystopian.
And you keep signing off on it, course after course after course. I mean, you can see why. To even define what the very first drill is in the training drills, right? OTTR0, you've got to understand what a thetan is, and then you've got to understand what operating means. It's like you can see that you could stop right there if you didn't, but many people didn't, because the whole idea of an operating thetan was exactly what pulled them in. Oh my God, that's the shit I want. Fascinating. But all that's changed, all that's renamed. I just am stunned by how many people support. And it was very interesting to me to realize that I actually left not long after Hubbard died,
Yeah.
because the whole sense of which had been kind of, I don't know, fun. I had a great group of friends and we had a wonderful time. I mean, I was always a little bit fretful about what I was signing off on and stuff, but we were all these ethical beings trying to be great people on the planet. And, in my group, it was all artists trying to make our way. And we were supposed to be the best people in the world, according to, their dreams are dreamed by artists, is his big quote. So I began to realize that I got more and more scared and more nervous and more like, oh, I'm leaving, when Miscavige came. Yeah.
When we were talking, I got to go to that event. The book was pretty new out. It's been out for a while now. Can you tell me what some of the most interesting reactions have been like? Maybe in your own family, maybe some things that surprised you. I mean, you were taking some chances doing this. I mean, you're in the academic world, and so I imagine that there were some risks involved. How has it turned out for you?
Bottom line, end of the sort of the really quick question is, I was expecting so much stuff and very little came at me. I mean, there's a moment in the end of the book where I'm talking about this weird waking dream I have, and I'm very interested in classical mythology, and the my Bunkerophiles will recognize this story that love that stuff too, which is Antigone, who gets shut up in a tomb. That's the sort of the bad end when people rewrite that story, but that's basically it. She thwarts the rules of the kingdom and she's left to die. And so I was kind of shut up in this upright sarcophagus, and I knew that this big stone had just been lowered into place above me, like a stone that was like 1.5 feet, 2 feet. And I knew that there was no way I had the strength to lift that stone. And I was going to be scratching and calling, and, my fingernails would go down to the nub. I mean, it was sort of this weird waking dream where I could imagine no one's going to hear me. No, and I was describing it to a friend, and I kept hearing myself say, I'm shut up. I'm shut up. And I just looked at the pun of that and went, oh my God. And that was the moment when I thought, I am publishing this book. I don't care what happens. I will not be shut up. I remember at the time I was at Franklin and Marshall, and I went to the dean of the college, and the dean of faculty, and said something about, the college may get stuff thrown at it. This is the kind of stuff that can happen sometimes. And, on the one hand, you kind of want it because it means like, you're rattling their cage. And of course, largely one does not. So I love this dean of faculty. She said, you're a grown up and you know what you're doing, and we're a college and we know what we're doing. So I say, bring it on to both you and us. And it was a great blessing to have that from her. My dad had died by the time the book came out. My mother was still alive, and I was able to carry, she was down living with my sister in Arizona by that time. And there's two moments there. One was about a year and a half, 2 years before I finished the book, she asked me what I was working on for the numpteenth time, because she was that was happening with her. And
Right.
I told her memoir, and I said, sometimes I just am so sad about those years I was in Scientology. I caused you and dad so much pain and anguish. And of course, I just sometimes think, what did I do to my life? And she was sort of folding laundry or something. And she said, I don't know. It made you who you are today. And I think you're pretty great.
Wow.
That was enormous. And then when I took the book down, she'd moved then to my other sister's house to live in. I took the book down to show her, and she just clasped it to her bosom and said, I knew you'd do it. I don't think she knew what it was about per se. She couldn't really see very well by then, but she knew I'd done it. And in our literary family, bringing a book out was a big deal. So those two things felt like huge blessings. However, about 9 months after the publication of the hardback, I got this weird letter from a guy on Amazon who said, I've been selling your book through my website, through my account on Amazon, and I've received a letter from the publishing wing of Scientology saying that there is a copyright infringement with your book. And I just, my eyes just went like this in the proverbial, and I said, what? So I got hold of Counterpoint, my publisher, and my editor, Jennifer, and they were great, went after it. But because of this copyright infringement accusation, which if you were on the other side of it, you'd be very happy that someone was reporting that, right? If you were on the other foot, I'd be very happy someone was saying, you seem to have infringed on something. But this I knew was absolute BS, because for one thing, I had covered my ass, and I think it had possibly to do with flunk start in the title. Possibly, but I don't think that's copyright term, but they never explained it. And they very similar to the Trumpian stuff in a way that's going on a little bit right now with the constant obfuscation and delay tactics, but with the court, but they just kept delaying and pushing back and never really delivering anything. But finally, they lifted that, and the hardback was able to be for sale again. Unfortunately, by that time, we were already working on bringing out the paperback. So the sales of the hardback had sort of settled down, and we were looking to launch the paperback. And so it wasn't as big a problem as it could have been had it happened, a week into the publication. That would have been a huge bummer, because whatever we think about our local, whether buying through Amazon or supporting our local bookstores, Amazon is where people buy books. So it was a blow, but nothing like the blow it could have been.
And then when you did come out with the paperback, tell me what happened with the title.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, so this is the cover of you can see I'm prepared. Here's the cover of the hardback, right? Flunk start with this. And I kind of wanted the falling figure because my brother's a huge part of this as well. And he fell off the bridge, but also down the rabbit hole, all these little images. So it's a little cartoony for my taste, really, but I appreciated how big the flunk start was, which I loved. But then as we were heading into the paperback, my editor calls me up and she says, Sands, I have the strangest news for you. And it was very strange because she had pushed hard to retain flunk start in the title. She had loved that because it's the theme of the book. It's like, you fall down, you get up, I love that Samuel Beckett says, fail again, fail better. I just loved that connotation all through the book. She said, the powers that be, the people that, sell the books and do the book stuff in the company at Counterpoint, think that Flunk Start sounds too much like a self-help book, even though it says a memoir, nice and big on the cover. And I was in my office actually at Franklin and Marshall when I got that phone call, and I literally had to sit down. It was like, oh my God, because I loved my title. And so we went back and forth about a bunch of things. And bottom line, I said, we have to retain Reclaiming My Decade Lost in Scientology. It's what the book is actually about. And also, there is some name recognition in that case. So we agreed on that. And I have to say, I love the cover of the paperback very much. There's this beautiful way that the D and the E and the L and the T are kind of like being grabbed into
It's
whatever.
very 3D, very in depth. Yeah.
And quite beautiful. And it does. So I'm very, 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 very happy. Plus, of course, it has your wonderful blurb on the back, which makes me very, very happy. So, and I was very grateful that they chose the 3 blurbs they chose from different newspapers and whatever that. So that was big, and I was very happy for it. The only real downside there was any of the reviews I'd received on Amazon, because it's a different ISBN, would not transfer over to the paperback. So the nice accumulated reviews didn't pass over. So I wrote some of those people and said, would you mind? But it was too much work. And I just thought the book will find its way. It'll find its way to the people that want and need to read it. And to this day, I'll get, messages or phone calls just saying, thank you, thank you. Above all, and surprisingly to me, Tony, it's been the people who have said, it's allowed me to look at a decade I thought was lost in my life and have another way of looking at it. And, all the reviews in the world don't count up to something like that when you have actually made a shift in somebody's life in that way. So feel so, so lucky. And also, I just know I changed my way of thinking in this world by writing it.
Well, that's my next question was, has that whole experience then changed the way you write, changed the way you read about things? I mean, how did it affect you?
The thing was that whatever caused me to find my way to what I felt Scientology would offer me and give me and do for me or solve for me, that was still present in my life because, of course, Scientology had not solved those things, had not done that for me. I mean, there's that, and I really didn't progress very far up the bridge, actually. I was a happy little consumer of the courses at the bottom. They made me very happy. I loved that stuff. And I was, supposedly a last lifetime clear. And once blah, 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 blah. So I kind of scuttled around the bottom of the bridge for quite a long time, but as I launched into writing the book and then rewriting the book and rewriting the book, the writers at Underground Bunker understand how often it takes the rewrite to figure out what you're actually saying. I began to understand that even if the book never got published, and I wanted it to be, I was so grateful for having plunged in and plowed this terrain and figured out what it was, because all of those things were still in my psyche, and I had to confront them newly, and to confront them by writing about them was so powerful. So, bottom line, it's like, it's not going to get solved out there. The only person that can solve it and figure it out and change it is in here. That was the great big lesson, and maybe that's what Scientology wanted, the cognition they wanted us to have, right? The epiphany, perhaps, of OT 99 or whatever it is. But for me, that was in writing the book, and that it just released a lot. It's like, you make your happiness. It's up to you, and you form your thoughts. That ancient phrase, it's like, be careful what you think, because those become your actions, and be careful what your actions are, because those become your words, or vice versa. And be careful what your actions are, because that will become your life. And you realize it starts with that nitty little thought that you have to figure out, well, I don't really want to think that, because let's think this instead. And those have been very, very powerful, ancient wisdom,
Right.
nothing new to me, but ones that I could finally put to use.
Well, you're part of a very sophisticated writer community. I'm curious. I remember at the time I was curious what you were going to hear in that environment.
That's probably been one of the biggest surprises, Tony. And I'm really, really happy that you asked that question, because the book got taken really seriously. And I'm amongst the blurbs, the two besides yours on the back of the book, I'm so proud. One comes from The Nation, that august ancient magazine that deals with politics of all things. And the other one comes from the Times Literary Supplement, one of England's biggest papers. So I like the fact that although I got the Kirkus and the Starred Review from Library Journal, and these lovely reviews that mean a lot, that those thoughtful perspectives on what my effort was, because it is an effort to be. I didn't have a big escape. I mean, I so admire the people that come before me who did their, I wrote mine because of the people who wrote, all those people whose books, I think you have many on the back of your shelf,
Right.
they led the way, they paved the way. And I didn't have to leap barbed wire on a motorcycle. I didn't have to hide in the back of a car. I managed to go off to a MFA program at the University of Iowa, 2,000 miles away from LA, and just sort of creep away. The timing was good also, I think. There was a lot of upheaval in the church, but I didn't. So I wanted to write a book that asked the big philosophical questions about what is it that we want when we enter a church of any kind. And I appreciate, in your newsletter and on your website, you talk about, why don't you use cult? Why do you use church? And I so appreciate your answer to that. I've been asked that in readings. Why do you keep referring to it as a church? And it's like, well, now I kind of go back and forth between the two. But the fact of the matter is, I had to figure out what cult meant to me, before I could actually label it that and understand, yes, there is psychological manipulation. Yes, there is financial manipulation. And yes, there is a us versus them, and the various things that do define cult. But basically, the idea that I was inside of a institution that took itself seriously as a religion was pleasing to me. For a long time, that was one of the reasons I kept on, that idea that I was inside of something about the spirit, something about the soul. I think that is a big reason so many people still get involved, because there is such certainty. And when you are at a certain age looking for certainty, or your life's in this uproar, the way mine was after my brother's huge accident, you want this pillar. And that is what Scientology provides, especially at a young age, I think, when people are, it's like, oh my God, you mean, as my dad once said to me, I have to do what I want to do. It's like there's no one out there saying, what you have to do. And it's nice to have someone telling you what you have to do. And that's it.
It not only sells certainty, but it also, I think, people at certain times in their life, especially when they're young, like to think that there's this larger story that they're part of, that this everyday life I see can't be everything. And Scientology comes along and says, no, you're an incredibly important part of the story of the whole galaxy. You can see why that's very attractive to certain people. Now, to me, that doesn't work. I'm like, no. But
no, that was never, you're so right there. And that whole idea of I'm a god or whatever was not attractive. But what was attractive was that I could explain current things in my current life with past lives. And for some reason, that was tremendously satisfying. And I think a lot of us who love historical novels, it's like that's part of it. Oh, yeah, I was alive back there in Greece, or it's like because you've read so avidly, or maybe because there's memories, whatever. It's like you've got this, okay, and then if that whole auditing thing that takes you to the earlier similar or the earlier sillier, as sometimes people say. It's like, well, maybe that's the reason I'm having this problem with my husband now. It's like that stuff was very satisfying.
Well,
And again,
not only are you learning, you might have an interest in history and that kind of thing, but also who doesn't like to solve a mystery? And then Scientology tells you, no, you're the mystery. Go solve you. And then it's so centered on you. You never go in and like, okay, you now need to learn the history of L. Ron Hubbard. I mean, you soak that up at some point, but
right.
from day one, it's like, no, tell us what your story is. Where'd you come from? How far back can you remember? It's all about you. And I think that for some people, that's really appealing, that they yeah, we're going to solve a mystery and it's yourself. That's powerful.
It's very powerful. And then from what I understand, the idea that you can't actually ever be solved because of the unbelievable numbers of things clinging to you from having been blown up. I think I read, L. Ron Hubbard's son or somebody threw up when he first heard that whole concept, and that's such an astute statement. It's true. It's just always here. And it's always what I would talk about before. What did I do? But it's also like, who have I been?
Right.
So there's this really interesting thing of studying your belly button nonstop. And there is something I appreciated in the tech, which had to do with the 4 flows, where it was, what is done to you, I mean, that was handy, that was useful, and that's something sometimes that's a little thing that'll float by when I'm feeling a little put upon. Well, why don't you like reverse that one and take a look? It's useful if and when it is. But bottom line, you're right. It's not like, let's study the history of Scientology in Australia, or let's study the history of other religions. Let's have a course on other religions. You can go down that path in your own work if you are so desirous. I mean, that's what I loved about word chains. Oh, what does Israel mean? Oh, it's the name of this actual angel. Oh, I mean, then you kind of get this whole thing about Israel and Judaism, which I got during that study, but it wasn't anything that was in the course pack. Mm-hmm. It was because I went down a word chain that was, down into ancient Israel, which was just fun. But that is such an astute comment. It's just endlessly here. And that how bad that is for your psyche, for your soul, for your body, for every part of you.
So can you tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing lately? Because it's been a few years since we talked.
Well, in terms of I continue to play music, and I have some new songs that I'd started for, what do you call an album these days? Because these days you try to hand someone a CD and they run across the room saying, I've no way to play it,
Right.
But my new album, I'll just say, so I'm hoping that I'll have that done in November. It's taken a while because COVID. And I think one of the things I've been working on over years, and then came to a lovely sort of fruition about a year ago, is I'm quite taken. There's this scandal surrounding a writer named Wallace Stegner.
Oh, that's right. I was reading your material on that. Yes, fascinating.
Who wrote this Pulitzer Prize winning book called Angle of Repose, and very short story about that. I was with a theater company in this area in Nevada City, Grass Valley, where I live, and we thought, oh, we'll make a play out of Angle of Repose because it takes place locally, and we can do a sort of, huge endeavor, get a nice Fulbright or something to do with this. And someone said, there's some local dudgeon aimed in Stegner's direction. You should look into it. So I did, and discovered that he had copied verbatim just enormous chunks of Angle of Repose from another woman's reminiscences and also from her letters, which, my favorite thing about that is the review in the New Statesman that said that his letters, Stegner's voice in the letters was the height of authenticity, right? So I wrote a play, Fair Use, and then I also recently had a fabulous support from a wonderful magazine called Alta, and they published an enormous piece with just a lot of support behind it, and it got an enormous amount of attention, which was extremely gratifying, and to this day is. Just last night I was at a reading and someone talked about that. So that's just been a big focus of mine. And then, on I go with the next piece of writing and, taking care of my life here in Nevada City, which I have, a lovely time. Yeah.
God, I love that part of California. I
It is
really miss it.
It's so
And teaching?
Well, I retired from Franklin and Marshall quite intriguingly. I decided to retire in what would have been 20. So I was spending that final semester here in Nevada City because that's a beautiful arrangement I'd worked out with the college. Boy, was that magic. And so I was going back east for the 2 weeks I'd always spend there during the spring semester. And, it was that, I think we all experienced that during the pandemic, which was somewhere around March, April 28th, I'm going, of course I'm getting on a plane. And around March 3rd, I'm thinking, I wonder if I should get on a plane. And then, March 8th, it's like, no way I'm getting on a plane. It happened so fast. We all remember that.
Yeah.
And so I'd been asked to speak to the graduating seniors in the English department, and I had my retirement dinner. All that stuff went, belly up. But
Right.
I've been back since. I just love that college, and it was just the best experience in every way for me. So I continue to teach online courses. That was a great thing. I didn't know about Zoom until the pandemic. And I just have such a good time. I limit my classes generally to 8 people. So there's 9 of us on the screen, and teach everything from fiction strategies for the memoirists, to a weekend on how to build effective scenes, to something I call the accountability gathering, which is just gathering and writing together and once a week. And so lots of different people can find that on my website if they're at all interested. But I enjoy
one reason I wanted to ask you about teaching is I was just curious if you've run into any problems with AI at this point.
Tony, it's as if I'm choosing to live in another dimension. I haven't yet run into anything to do with AI. And that's a really great question, because I should probably be alert to it. Yeah, I haven't yet.
Yeah, because I thought of you because I was talking to a good friend of mine who is an editor at a major national publication where they hire book reviewers. And he was telling me that they put out a call for, some job openings, and people submitted their sample book reviews. And they actually found that some of the reviews submitted by these prospective book reviewers were written by AI.
Oh my goodness.
Can you imagine what it takes to submit something like that?
More and more, I can imagine. I mean, I've heard such stories about its ability that it's quite.
They're trying to make us obsolete, Sans. What are we going to do?
I know, it's terrible. Except that there can't be 2 faces on a Zoom call. I don't
know.
I don't know. It's what the actors are striking for.
That's right. Exactly.
Exactly. Because who knows what they can do? Yeah.
I know.
So that's really scary. I did have a writer friend tell me that she was working on a novel that takes place in, Puritan England, and I literally, the hinges of my jaw just went loose when she told me. She said that she knew she wanted to have a pastor give a ranting speech. It was, during the time when the girls all go crazy with the witching stuff, and she didn't want to have to write it. So she had AI write it for her. She gave the AI some things and blah, 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 and she said she tweaked a little and it works really well. And I was just like, But you know, I like theirs. She's like going, she's grabbing it and using it for her own purposes, right? She has
Right.
control over what she's doing.
And
Like,
as crazy as that sounds to you and me, I have a feeling the next generation will just think, well, that's just a crutch.
that's
You
just a
know,
crutch.
you just have the AI pump out some stuff. It's rough, it's not good, then you make it yours. And
Right.
they will think that's no big deal.
Uh-huh.
And but to me it's just so shocking. But I
Yeah,
guess that's the future.
I do too. Yep. It's coming our way. It's out of that one's out of the box. Yeah. That
And you know,
one's
David Miscavige could use that to write OT 9 and 10 now that I think of it.
there we go. There we go. Yeah. Just put it's actually a marvelous idea just to put that stuff and say online and go, so what is OT9? Tell us.
You know, some of my readers have been encouraging me to do stuff like that with the
Oh
with
my God,
AI,
that would
and
be
I've
hilarious.
resisted it. I just like, no, I don't want to go near the
No,
damn thing.
no, right. It actually gives me the creeps. It does. Yeah, it does. So, but Tony, I want to thank you so much. I mean, I wrote this to you, but when you were doing those briefs from the Masterson trial, I
Oh,
really was out with my computer. I would just go check it to see if another one had come in. And I was very, very grateful. The sartorial splendor alert, I always loved, of course, but just the way you kept us abreast as if we could be there with you, the amount of work that entailed, and of course, just your wonderful ability to write and keep us intrigued, but just the way you pump and give us both in a very humorous way and a very serious way. So grateful to you for what you do to keep us abreast of what's going on. And I'm just so grateful.
thank you. That was quite an experience. I wasn't the court reporter. I could not get down every word, but I was trying to give people a sense of what it was like. And I heard from people who were there and then read my thing later and said, "Yep, you caught it." So that was and also as a reporter, I was looking for things that maybe other people weren't looking for. And but yeah, what an experience. I and to go to both trials and then to have that verdict, let me tell you, that verdict, the whole thing was so surreal. I was that day, May 31st, we knew something was going on in the morning, and the clerk said, we want you to go to lunch. When you come back, we want everybody back. Oh, something's up. And the hallway outside the courtroom would get kind of crowded after lunch anyway. But now it was really packed because everybody wants to get in there. Sans, I was standing like 2 feet away from Danny and
Wow.
Bijou and their
Oh,
mother Carol and their
no.
brothers. I'm like right there.
My
And
God.
they were buoyant.
Yeah, they thought they were okay.
They thought they were walking in to hear that it was a hung jury. And I have to admit, after the first trial experience, I kind of figure we were too. So we roll in there, and I'm kind of thinking, oh, this is going to be awful. They're all happy already. And then the judge said, we have two verdicts. And I was like, whoa.
My God.
Yeah. And they all knew, Bijou knew, they all knew that they had filed 3 to get 2. They needed 2 to send
I
him to
see.
prison. He
I
wouldn't
see.
go to
Yes.
prison with
Yes.
1. And when the clerk read the first one guilty, and it was when she said the second one guilty, that's when I heard this otherworldly wail. And I looked around like, what is that? And I realized sitting right in front of me was Bijou. And it was this involuntary, just awful sound that came out of her, which then turned into very loud sobbing. And the judge said, listen, I'm sorry, you're going to have to compose yourself. She knew too, right? We knew too. And that second one, he's going to prison. So what a moment. You know, I'm still
What?
getting chills. I didn't expect it. I really thought there was going to be a hung jury. And then he stood up, and a female deputy came over and put handcuffs on him. So I thought that was very, and it had been mostly male deputies the whole time. So that was kind of interesting.
It
I
is.
don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know if they'd planned that or not, but all of a sudden it was a woman
Wow.
putting the cuffs on him. And I've always thought it was interesting that, you know, not only were these Jane Does going through hell testifying multiple times and being cross-examined 3 different times, but it was a woman judge. And it was really a woman prosecutor who made the difference in the second trial, I personally believe. So,
It's great, Tony. Yeah.
I really appreciate that you found that useful and it helped put you there.
I just know I'm not the only one who was running around my house pumping my fit. I just loved imagining all across the country, all across the world, people were going, yes, because you had put us there so substantially and thoroughly that we just were in the courtroom when that was announced. My God.
Yeah. Amazing. And we still don't know what he's going to get. He's well, I'll probably no. This will air before he is sentencing. So, yeah, he's looking at 30 to life. So pretty amazing. Did you besides the bass player? Did you know many celebrities in your time in Scientology?
Not a lot. I came to know Karen Black a little bit. A sweet little thing. And the probably biggest person I came to know was not kind of by extension Chick Corea, but mostly his wife, Gail Moran, who we hung out a lot together. And there was a song I wrote called Light a Candle for Freedom that she, which is a cappella, and she and I and another person sang it for it's a great story, a couple of Scientology rallies until I literally lost my voice. I just realized I couldn't sing this song for this reason. And then I stopped singing for about a decade.
Wow.
It was really, and it took me a long time to recover that story. So yeah, I'll send you a link to that it's really short, but it's
send it to me and I'll publish it with this
that sounds
recording.
great.
So listen, thank you so much. It's so great to catch up with you. I hope you get to New York again before too long, and I'd love to see you perform again. That's a real treat.
Thank you. I'm sorry that we didn't get to do our wonderful thing we had in mind, where I was going to do a reading where you were going to play Milton Katselas.
That's right. That's right. I forgot about that.
Yes, from my book, we were going to do a little thing. So maybe another time we'll do that, because that would be really fun. Yeah. Sort of dramatize that. Well, what a pleasure, Tony. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Sands. All righty. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.